Tonight, Russia paralyzed. Boris Yeltsin fights for his political life. Blood and protest in Israel. More anger at the peace plan. Kim Campbell ponders the prospect of governing with a minority. And in our magazine, Showdown at the Kremlin. Boris Yeltsin dissolves Parliament, and Parliament throws out Yeltsin. Who's in charge there? President Clinton's hopes for health reform.
In which health care is a right, not a privilege.
But can it happen? CBC Primetime News with Peter Mansbridge and Pamela Wallen.
Good evening. It is still one of the biggest global powers, and tonight no one is sure just who's in charge. Just this morning, Boris Yeltsin was the president of Russia. Tonight, its parliament says he's not.
It's been a day of extraordinary political and human drama. Two rival forces in bitter struggle for a nation. Tonight, in scenes reminiscent of the Soviet coup 2 years ago, barricades are being raised in Moscow, as are concerns around the world. Our coverage begins on the scene with Don Murray.
Once again, Boris Yeltsin was on national television announcing stern measures and a new crisis. The Russian parliament had created a paralysis of state power through systematic opposition. The country was on the edge of an abyss.
Starting today, lawmaking powers of the Congress of People's Deputies and the Supreme Soviet ceases to exist. The Congress sessions will not be taking place anymore.
It's necessary to save Russia and the whole world from the catastrophic consequences of the breakup of the Russian state, he says, and from the spread of anarchy in a country with an enormous nuclear arsenal. That is my only goal. But in the Parliament building just a few minutes later, Parliamentary Speaker Ruslan Khasbulatov was defiant. He called Yeltsin's announcement a state coup d'etat. And in an eerie echo of August 1991, he announced he would remain in the building and organize its defense against Yeltsin. Just 2 years ago, in this same building, Khasbulatov had been Yeltsin's lieutenant in defiance of the August putsch, which had tried to topple Mikhail Gorbachev. The parliamentary speaker had the open support of the president of the Constitutional Court, Valery Zorkin, who came to Parliament and then left to convene a session of the court to examine Yeltsin's measure. Already, one judge was calling it a criminal decision. An hour later, the parliamentary leadership met, and sitting with them was Russian Vice President Alexander Rutskoy. The lawmakers announced they were stripping Yeltsin of the presidency. At midnight, in an emergency session of the legislature now dissolved by Yeltsin, Rutskoy signed documents proclaiming him president with the deputies' approval. In the halls, deputies were calling on the people to support them.
If we will defend the parliament like they did it 2 years ago, right? In the August of 1991, if we will defend the parliament, if we will defend democracy, if we will defend Russia, everything will be okay.
Outside the parliament, crowds were gathering. Unlike August 1991, the flags tonight weren't Russian, but the red flags of the dead communist state. The roles were reversed. The confrontation promised to be just as brutal.
Tonight in Moscow, the executive and the legislative branches are engaged in open warfare. There will be no compromise. At the end of this conflict, either Boris Yeltsin or his parliamentary enemies will be politically destroyed. Don Murray, CBC News, Moscow.
Well, one of the deputies of the Russian parliament, Boris Yeltsin, has just dissolved, is Leonid Volkov. He joins us tonight from the Russian capital. Mr. Volkov, who is in control in Moscow at this moment?
It's not so easy to answer this question, to be frank, because I just passed Moscow, through all the Moscow, and I haven't seen any troops or any military movements or something like this. Even just around the White House, there are only several people with red flags. So I think that from the point of view of the position of the population, they would rather support Yeltsin.
If that's the case, I guess what it boils down to is who has the support of the Russian military. Who does have the support of the Russian military tonight?
I don't think that anyone in the military would shoot each other. That's why I think that the support of military is not the most real problem after all. You see, to dismiss Yeltsin, in fact, it is necessary to arrest him at least. I don't think that Mr. Rudskoy or Mr. Hasbulatov would find enough troops to arrest Yeltsin.
So in summary, you feel that this can be resolved in a democratic process as opposed to a military process?
If Mr. Rudskoy is brave enough and popular enough to use at least some military detachments to try to arrest Yeltsin, in this case, and if he is successful, in this case, of course, he had the chance to win, at least in Moscow. But it would come to an awful solution because the terror we may expect, the wide wave of terror we may expect if really Rudskoy and the parliament, or it's better to say the Supreme Soviet or its communist majority would win.
Mr. Volkov, we do appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Leonid Volkov is one of the Russian deputies of the Russian parliament. He joined us from Moscow. Pam.
Not surprisingly, leaders everywhere else are wondering if Yeltsin will win this high-stakes gamble or lose this round of political Russian roulette. The answer is not clear. So far, the West is offering firm but cautious support. The CBC's Terry Malevsky with that.
Ever since the Vancouver summit, Bill Clinton has prided himself on being Boris Yeltsin's friend. But the U.S. had only 1 hour's warning of Yeltsin's actions today, and Clinton seemed to be caught off guard.
Sitting here, Boris Yeltsin has dissolved the Russian parliament and called elections for that parliament in December. And his major opponent has apparently declared himself president. They're going through these things, trying to come to grips with what it means to be a democracy.
But later, after Clinton phoned Yeltsin, he put out a statement in a much more serious tone, saying, in a democracy, the people should finally decide the issues. President Yeltsin has made this choice, and I support him fully. There were hints that something was up last week when Russian Foreign Minister Andrei Kozyrev told Secretary of State Warren Christopher to expect dramatic developments. The U.S. is now hoping they won't be too dramatic, like troops in the streets.
We have no indication of any abnormal or unusual movements. The Ministry of Defense has announced that they're going to maintain a position of strict neutrality.
Campaigning in Ontario, Kim Campbell took a cautious pro-democracy line.
Canada has always strongly supported the democratization of the former Soviet Union and have been willing to play whatever role we could to encourage those forces in the former Soviet Union, what is now Russia. And it remains for us to have a clear picture of exactly what's happening there and how we can best serve that goal.
Of course, no Western government really knows right now who is running Russia, but the Clinton administration is backing Yeltsin all the way, and brushing off questions about whether his actions were really constitutional. The Pentagon, for its part, is stressing tonight that Russia's defense minister is a Yeltsin loyalist and that Russia's nuclear weapons remain under Yeltsin's control. Terry Malevsky, CBC News, Washington.
So it's a very volatile situation in Moscow, still very fluid tonight. A little later in the program, we'll have more on what is happening and what may be happening next.
Meanwhile, in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia today, more casualties from a bloody conflict there. A passenger jet carrying 28 people was shot down. It was trying to land in Sukhumi, the capital of the breakaway region of Abkhazia. The plane crashed into the Black Sea. No survivors have been found. Georgian officials say separatist rebels shot the passenger plane down.
To the Middle East now, where the peace agreement between Israel and the PLO is being put to the test. Tonight, a senior Palestinian leader, a supporter of the deal, was assassinated outside his home in the Gaza Strip. As the CBC's Paul Workman reports, the murder took place on what's been a very emotional day in Israel.
A senior PLO leader gunned down in the Gaza Strip. The first political assassination over peace, raising fears of a bloody Palestinian civil war. And in Jerusalem, thousands of right-wing Israelis praying at the Wailing Wall for the peace plan to fail and their government to fall. From the wall, they headed for the country's parliament, taking the most provocative route possible. Through the streets of Old Jerusalem, normally crowded with Arabs, tonight crowded with police and soldiers. Trouble was inevitable. This, after all, is the heart of the battle for both Arabs and Jews. Two people, one city, tenuous peace. At Damascus Gate, Palestinians stood on one side with their liberated flags. Israelis stood on the other, chanting death to the Arabs. Soldiers finally moved in, pushed the Palestinians back, and prevented what could have been a huge fight. The mood inside the Israeli Knesset was almost as wild for one of the most important debates in the country's history. 100 years of war will not kill our dream of peace, said Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. He was heckled, interrupted, called a liar. The survival of his coalition government is on the line. A small religious party has threatened to vote against the deal unless Rabin calls a referendum. I can't tell you how I'm going to vote, said this rabbi, because I don't know yet. The leader of the opposition, Likud, says the government has threatened Israeli security. It should now let the people decide. Prime Minister Rabin is guaranteed a bare majority in the parliament, but only if he counts the votes of 5 Arab members. It's enough, but on such a crucial issue, he wants even more. The peace plan has already been sealed by an Arab-Israeli handshake. Rabin now wants a Jewish vote of confidence. Paul Workman, CBC News, Jerusalem.
John Demaniuk left Israel tonight a free man. Nearly 2 months after his acquittal on war crimes charges, the retired auto worker boarded a plane for the United States. This evening, Demaniuk was released from prison and taken in handcuffs to the airport. In July, Israel's Supreme Court cleared him of charges he was Ivan the Terrible, a sadistic Nazi guard at the Treblinka death camp.
The health debate in the United States.
And that coverage must be secure no matter who you work for, where you work, where you live, or whether you have ever been sick before.
Sounds like a Canadian idea. But how much did the Clintons take from Canada? We'll debate the Clinton cure in Primetime magazine.
The Toronto police force is once again facing charges of racism following a complaint by a Jamaican tourist. She says police strip-searched her in public on a busy Toronto street. The force is now conducting an internal investigation, and Paul Hunter has more on the story.
The allegation is simple. A woman standing at this intersection late one night last month says she was stopped by police and accused of carrying drugs. Then, she says, she was stripped by police and searched in public. No drugs were found.
I was so ashamed.
Audrey Smith, a mother of 5, is visiting Canada from Jamaica. In an interview last week, she described how police left her standing at the corner.
Yeah, my bodysuit was at my feet. My bra was off, my panty was down.
Her story has sparked outrage in Canada.
This latest incident reinforces our belief that the police force of Metropolitan Toronto is racist.
And it's front page news in Jamaica, where today's Gleaner reads, protest mounts over strip search.
No, because no apology was given.
The Gleaner's Canadian editor says the allegations may have deepened the rift between Toronto police and the black community.
How is it going to affect the community? I mean, it's a detrimental effect on the community. It's a slap in our face.
Toronto's chief of police met with Smith today and told her his force is investigating. He called the whole episode an embarrassment.
I don't think that any such investigation that results as a complaint and the publicity which ensues with that can be anything else but embarrassing.
Audrey Smith did.
Being rewarded, I think, is a very Victorian ethic that we brought into our time that doesn't apply anymore. I don't think my hard work has been rewarded in any difference in my lifestyle. On a daily basis in my job, the lifestyle that I saw out there with people who were living in metro housing, on family benefits and welfare, was no different than my lifestyle, not at all. Hand to mouth, we live exactly the same lifestyle. I cannot begin to express how bitter and angry I am with the social...
Her resignation letter had an eerie sound to it, the sound of a work ethic evaporating. And this from a woman whose lifelong devotion to hard work was almost religious.
I think now of how I rushed my children through their childhood while I scrambled to get ahead. I started out in 1983 at a $14,000 job in an entry-level position. I took on extra duties and did whatever it took to climb slowly up the ladder financially. When I got the job at $37,000, I was elated. I thought, this is it. My kids and I are going to be able to live at some other level than hand to mouth. And I rented a small house. It was $850 a month, plus utilities and water and sewage. When I got my first check from Metro Housing, I was outraged when I saw that the amount was really only, I can't remember exactly anymore, but it was such a small amount that I received extra in take-home pay from the $28,000 to the $37,000 because of the taxes. I get a very small kitchen in here.
That's how they wound up in the attic apartment. Moving here was an uncomfortable economy, but it saved $200 a month.
This
What's
is
this area?
my room. This is the dining room. This is the living room. And this cot is my bedroom. This is where I sleep.
Eventually, her salary crept up to $41,000, but it didn't feel like it. She still felt poor.
For instance, this summer when I took my children to 2 movies on Tuesday nights because it was half price, and I took them horseback riding once at $18 for each child. It meant that doing that, I would have to borrow money the following week for food because I cannot afford to do anything that's a luxury with my children. I can barely make the necessities, and I had assumed that maybe at this wage level that I would be able to do the odd treat type of thing with my children, but I can't without it costing on the other end.
Then came Ontario's new surtax and the cutbacks of the so-called social contract. And suddenly, the $200 a month she'd made all those economies to achieve was gone, swallowed by a government that had promised to tax the rich.
I cried because I knew what the effect would be on my family. And then my first reaction was that, well, I will have to take a part-time job. I mean, that was my immediate response to this, is I would look for a part-time job. But then I started questioning that because, first of all, when would I ever see my children? Why do I even have them if I'm going to be working all day and all night just to,
So she quit, and she made that resignation letter public.
Now I find the irony is I would have been better off on family benefits all along.
Then, in her eagerness to sting the government, she did something she would profoundly regret. She sat down with Ontario Tory leader Michael Harris and, in front of reporters, she reread the part of her letter saying she'd be better off on welfare. Instantly, her resignation was transformed from a tax protest into the cynical act of a lazy right-winger, and she began to take some heat.
She's got quite a lot of nerve, actually, considering there are those of us, myself, who are still unemployed and looking for work, and hey, I'll gladly go in for her whatever time.
And I really have a hard time understanding why she's grasping at all these straws, trying to defend a decision that's morally repugnant.
And I have grave difficulty with someone who would even contemplate giving up a job with a salary.
Even Bob Ray waded in, and on national TV.
Well, I can't conceive of the country being built on that kind of an attitude.
I don't really care what he says about me. Maybe the system is wrong.
Of effort.
I would like to see Kim Campbell and Bob Ray eat hot dogs and craft dinner at their next Premier's meeting. You know, the rest of us do, why not them?
But what about Hella Hulgaard's assertion that she'd be better off on welfare? Well, the fact is she wouldn't. Not at $41,000. Not yet, anyway. But you don't have to go too much further down the pay scale from $41,000 to find tens of thousands of Canadians for whom welfare would be even money, or even a raise in pay. It's an economic perversity known as the disincentive line. And when you're living close to the disincentive line, working for a living can seem pretty pointless.
Excuse me, guys. Get your bags.
In Coquitlam, British Columbia, Mary Ellen Standrick and her 2 children have been off welfare now for about 3 years. She makes about $26,000, $15,000 less than Hella Hulgaard. Mary Ellen Standrick and her family have found the disincentive line, and they've set up housekeeping on it. After taxes, Mary Ellen takes home about $1,500 a month, about $300 more than she did on welfare and subsidies. But then she didn't have all these expenses when she was on welfare.
You didn't need a vehicle, you didn't need daycare, you didn't need to worry about anything. If you ran out of groceries and you had no money, you could get food vouchers to get food. You didn't have to worry about any of your expenses, basically. They paid for everything.
Do you ever seriously contemplate returning?
To social services?
Right.
Usually it works out to a good 2-3 times a year when you stop and you think that you just don't understand why you're doing it. But you know you're doing it because you want to be happy and you have these great morals, you know, of how you want your children to see life. But there's at least 2-3 times a year when I think, I don't understand why I'm here or why I'm doing this, because it's not financially, you know, enhancing.
Morning BC Housing, can you hold please? Morning BC Housing, can you hold please? Morning BC Housing.
You're just always having to place your children second best. You know, they wake up in the morning, well, I'm not feeling well. Well, I'm sorry, but you have to go to school, but just don't tell anybody that you're sick, because I can't afford a day off, or else we can't afford, you know, a particular part of our lifestyle.
This guy's coming in here to sign this.
Your only incentive to work is a moral work ethic.
Basically, my pride, my self-confidence,
You
and
got no
because
financial incentive.
No, not really. I mean, like I say, when people kick you when you're down, that makes you move, you know, whether it's in the right direction or not. So you do. You go ahead and you get a job and you think, okay, look at me now. I'm working. Are you people happy now? But it has nothing to do with them being happy. It has to do with you just going to work because that's what's expected of you.
Okay, you guys get your coats and stuff and let's go.
So that she can work, Mary Ellen is often the last mom to pick up her kids at daycare.
Thank you for the birds that sing. Thank you, God, for everything. Amen.
Thank you.
And she knows that she's only a few $1,000s away from a much higher tax bracket, one that will eat even deeper into any dreams she has for her kids.
I have, you know, wanted for a long time to have these guys in a house we can call our own with, our own yard and, you know, maybe a vacation once in a while, something like that. But I don't look very far for things like that because it's such an impossibility.
There it is again, the sound of that work ethic evaporating. Of course, during an election campaign like this one, politicians will say it's a sound that concerns them tremendously. But in reality, the working poor are not by a long shot the biggest worry of government. After all, Mary Ellen Standrick might be poor, but she still pays taxes. No, of much greater concern to governments nowadays are all those Canadians on the other side of the disincentive line. Welfare recipients who pay no taxes, and for whom a return to the workplace would mean a cut in pay.
I'm applying for the position of shipper part-time. My name is Sally Lambon, my telephone.
Montrealer Sally Lambon is one of those people, a single mother on welfare now for about 2 years. She takes home nearly $1,000 tax-free on welfare, plus another $200 or so in subsidies, $1,200 a month.
It allows us to eat. It allows us to pay our electricity, pay our phone, rent a movie maybe once a month. But it doesn't cover any of my son's entertainment. I mean, there's no room for that. It covers the necessities of life. That's exactly. I have to say no many times because he has to have a bus pass. He has to have food. He has to have running shoes periodically. School clothes. Okay, and what does that pay you? Yes, I'm on welfare. Yes.
If she lands a job at minimum wage, and most often nowadays the jobs at the other end of the phone are minimum wage, she would take home about $660 a month after taxes, hundreds less than she takes home on welfare.
Have you got an hourly wage below which you just cannot go and work?
I really can't do it for minimum. I can't work under 7. Under 7 I won't make it. I'll be in worse shape than when I was on welfare. And that doesn't seem right, that, you know, that you're willing to go, but there's not a middle. There's not something that's just going to give you that little boost, that little extra help. to make you say, hey, I don't want to be on welfare. And I mean, nobody chooses to be on welfare. It's not something you planned up and said, oh yeah, today I've decided I want to live on welfare for the rest of my life. Okay, I've done cashier and sales. Well, I think I have more experience in cash. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and which metro is that?
You didn't bother to ask them what kind of money it was?
No, I didn't think. I go to the interview first and then you ask at the interview.
And that is Sally's day. Looking for work, desperate to work, but unable to work, at least for the kind of grim wages Montreal pays its working poor. In order to get off welfare, she has to accept an even more miserable life. And for her child's sake, she can't. It's a maddening dilemma, especially given the contempt society reserves for welfare recipients.
People say, oh, well, she's on welfare, I support her, I pay for her. Try to live on what you give me. You know, let one of these people just take a walk in my shoes. You never know it until you're there. And I never thought I would be here. I never thought it was possible that I could end up here. Something has to give. There's more and more people, not less and less. More and more people forced to. More and more people making minimum wage, living below the poverty line, getting less than what you're getting on welfare. But they do it.
Meanwhile, in Toronto, Hella Hulgaard cleaned out her desk the other day. It was a lot harder than she thought it would be.
Well, I really, really enjoyed my job. I really liked it. It's everything that I had ever worked for. And so it was really hard to take a stand and give that up. It was just hard.
She hasn't applied for welfare, not yet. It's a line she can't bring herself to cross. She's toying with starting a house cleaning business or finding a lower paying job. Anything to get around or over that disincentive line. For Primetime News, I'm Neil MacDonald in Toronto.
Stay with us. When we come back, more on work and welfare. How can people...
Who is with the Canadian Council on Social Development. We want, obviously, to talk about solutions, debate some of them, but it's awfully hard to watch an item like we just watched with Neil's and not have some kind of reaction to what are really the human statistics that we talk about every month. And I wouldn't mind getting some sense from each of you on how you felt. Barbara Green?
Well, I was very touched by both the interviews, and this is a problem that we've been very much aware of at our Poverty Committee. We feel that we have to have a social system that helps people to work and makes them financially better off working. And so our poverty reports have identified this problem, and we've recommended some solutions to it.
Okay, we'll talk about those reports in a minute. John Clark, when you watch those stories?
Well, I think it's an appalling situation, and we have no desire to counterpose the interests of people on welfare to working people struggling to make ends meet. The issue is to ensure that people have access to decent paying jobs, and that's the issue that's not being addressed here.
All right, Patrick Johnson, when you watch that, let me just say that when I watched it, one of the things that struck me was there were differences in the cases, but there was one glaring similarity. They were all women. They were all single mothers. They were all trying to raise children in a difficult situation. Where are the fathers, husbands, boyfriends here? Is this a common thread we see in these cases?
It is very common, Peter. In fact, all of the cases that were documented are very typical of the people who end up both under the poverty line and on social assistance. And clearly one of the problems, and perhaps one of the solutions, is ensuring that the fathers are living up to their obligation to look after their children.
Barbara Green, you mentioned the House Committee reports that you've chaired and your proposals. What are they? How would they impact on these kind of situations? What are you suggesting should happen?
Well, we recommended a guaranteed earned income supplement that would ensure that people are financially better off working. And we also recommended a large child benefit. And in fact, my thinking has progressed that perhaps what we should do is have the federal government fund the child benefit and turn it into a guaranteed earned income supplement for the working poor as well.
So in real terms, say in the example of the woman in the middle there in BC who is working, but in fact she's losing what she could be
Yeah.
getting if she was on social assistance. What would that mean to her, your proposal?
It would mean that she would continue to receive her child benefit plus an additional supplement for working that would counter some of those other costs, and it would decline gradually as her income rose.
Peter, can I just make an observation here? One of the things that frustrated me about that documentary is that the issue of disincentives is not a new one. This has been an insidious problem that has been in the system, the social assistance, for many, many years. We're more acutely aware of it now, I think, because of the recession, more people on the social assistance rolls. But it has been a problem that has been around for a long time.
Okay, but fine. Barbara Green is suggesting something here.
It's worse now in
and those
Ontario.
suggestions, absolutely, but those suggestions and ideas like them have been proffered by a number of groups over the years. The problem is there has not been the political will of the federal or the provincial governments to sit down and really sort through and implement the kinds of changes that have been talked about and proposed for many years.
So are you saying that you like, but just a sec, are you saying then that you like those changes? You just want to see them implemented?
I'm not suggesting that necessarily they are good or bad. I think there may be aspects of them that are positive. The problem is that there has been no serious political will made to the senior levels of government to sit down and figure out which are good, which are not, and moving ahead.
Okay, let John Clark.
We're talking about a situation now where there's a proposal essentially on the table to pull money out, federal money out of support for adults, to create, I think, the myth that the children are being taken care of, so that all the more effectively the income support programs, the social assistance programs, they can be eroded. And that process of eroding their adequacy has been going on for an extended period of time, and it applies to unemployment insurance too. And I return to what I think is the basic point here, and that is that we talk about a disincentive line. Well, there's a kernel of truth in that rather misleading term, and that is unquestionably, economists talk about a natural rate of unemployment of now about 1 million. If at the same time as you have all those people out of work, you erode the adequacy of things like welfare and unemployment insurance, then quite obviously, if you're in the business of paying low wages, you have a more ready and a more plentiful supply of cheap labour. Employers here in Ontario are crying the blues about not being able to compete with Michigan. In Michigan, they chose to cut everybody that was single employable off of the welfare rolls. If you're in the business of organising sweatshops, then I think, yes, the proposals are in line with what you want to do.
Well, surely you don't consider $37,000 a low wage.
The simple fact is that in the Helgard situation, the facts were wrong. The simple truth is that every person living on social assistance in this country is living below any recognised poverty line, your efforts notwithstanding on that point. And I really think,
But what's the issue? Is the issue social assistance, or is the issue jobs, the right kind of jobs?
I think the issue is jobs, of course, and we have to do everything we can, but there are also people who are in the position that these women are in, that they can't accept jobs that are available because the wages are too low because they have a number of children, okay? And if we can provide help by covering the costs of those children so that when they go to work, the fact that they have children is recognized more, then I think we can at least give them entry-level jobs so that they can eventually work up to better jobs.
So then what we then in effect do is provide a subsidy to employers. No longer do we have a situation where there's any concept of an employer's wage covering the cost of providing for a worker and his or her family. That's going to be paid for out of the general revenues by the taxpayers. And the effect of that is going to be to destroy the possibility of a decent and living minimum wage ever being achieved, and generally to depress wages across the board. I think it's a revolting and it's a cheap Labour proposal.
Okay, just let Patrick in here. He's been patient here for a minute.
I was just going to say that I think the real issue is jobs. I think that the greatest disincentive that exists in 1993 for those people who find themselves on unemployment insurance or social assistance is that there are simply not the kinds of employment opportunities available to them that they want and that we as a society need to be providing. And until we come to grips with that issue, then whatever we do on the social assistance side, and I'm not saying we shouldn't try, but I think it's really just going to be the equivalent of putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. To my mind, really the issue has to be the creation or the provision of enough employment opportunities for all those people on social assistance.
What about John's point about the government becoming this topping up facility to try and make up for the gap between the job and the minimum level of income that a family needs to get by on?
I think we can have minimum wages set at a level that would provide an adequate income for a single person. But once you get into the situation where you've got several children, I think we have to have supplementation, because otherwise you destroy jobs. Like your minimum wages The increases in the minimum wages in Ontario, for example, are, and you know, they cost perhaps about 60,000 jobs, according to one of the articles I read. And they shut certain people, like students, out of part-time work. And many of them are, in fact, entry-level jobs, okay? And there are many people that do these jobs and are quite thankful to have them. And often that is the key to getting a better job, getting some kind of work record.
I would say if we go the route that is being proposed by Ms. Green, then I'm concerned that the employers of this country are going to get caught in a cycle of welfare dependency.
I think John has a good point. I think we don't want to be doing anything that essentially provides a subsidy or a benefit to businesses. I think the problem, though, with the minimum wage, or one of the problems, is that it is not sensitive to the number of dependents that may be in a family. So I think that there have to be some other mechanisms that recognize the additional costs entailed in raising kids or raising a family.
And that's what I'm suggesting.
Well, I just wonder from each of you, before we close the topic down, whether you sense that governments, all governments, have the right emphasis here. Is it the social assistance program, or is it jobs? Are they emphasizing the right issue here?
Well, I think the jobs, everybody has to make that their first priority, but clearly some people are being shut out of ever getting into the job market by the structure of our social assistance programs. And we have taken one important step by adding the earned income supplement to the child benefit. That gave the working poor $500 a year. So it's a small step, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
John?
No, I think entirely the solution lies in the direction of jobs, but at the same time, we have to recognize there are going to be hundreds of thousands of people for the foreseeable future who are going to remain out of work, and to erode the system of supports that they need to turn to, I think is incredibly mean-spirited and just a dreadful way to go.
All right,
suggesting that.
Last word to you, Patrick.
Well, I am concerned that there has been as little discussion during the current election campaign about the issue of jobs as well as social assistance reform. And I hope I'm not being cynical, but I think that may bode ill for whatever happens following October 25th. I hope I'm wrong, but we simply have to be paying more attention to both those issues.
Well, take some solace in the thought that the campaign isn't over yet. There's still a fair distance to go. I thank all of you for your comments tonight.
You're very welcome.
Stay with us when we come back. Campaign update.
Preston Manning and his message.